Single dad janitor tried to stop his son from sitting with her until the cold CEO said, "Let him." "Can I sit here? I'm really tired." The voice was small, almost lost beneath the hiss of steamed milk and murmured conversations. But Sloane Kensington heard it. It cut through everything, the hum of business chatter, the clink of porcelain, even the icy walls she'd spent years building around herself. She looked up from her espresso, blinking slowly. A boy, maybe 4, maybe 5, stood beside her corner table. His coat was too thin for December. His cheeks were pink from the wind. One hand clutched a battered stuffed bear, the other rubbed his sleepy eyes. He didn't fidget or shuffle nervously like most kids might in front of a stranger. He just looked up at her with quiet exhaustion, like someone who had traveled a long road to get here. Sloane stared at him, lips parted, unsure what to say. "I asked because you look kind," the boy added softly. No one had said that to her in a long time. Before she could respond, a man jogged in hair-tousled uniform, clearly. Janitorial jacket unzipped and shoes wet from the melting snow outside. His eyes found the boy instantly. "Benji." "Bud. You can't just walk off like that." He stopped short when he saw who his son was speaking to. Sloane Kensington. The Sloane Kensington. He straightened, breathless. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He didn't mean to bother you. We'll go." But then she did something that surprised them both. "It's all right," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "He can sit." The janitor blinked. "You sure?" Sloane looked down at Benji again, the oversized boots the stuffed bear clutched like treasure, the faint shadows under his eyes, and something in her chest tugged loose. "I'm sure." Benji beamed and clambered onto the chair across from her, legs swinging above the floor. He set the bear down gently on the table between them. "This is Hope," he announced. "She doesn't talk, but she's good at listening." Sloane let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Hi, Hope." The janitor hesitated a second longer before lowering himself into the empty chair beside his son. His hands were calloused and his eyes, though tired, held something remarkably steady. "Thanks," he said simply. "Name's Colin. That's Benji." Sloane gave a polite nod. "Sloane?" Colin offered a faint smile. "Yeah, figured." She arched an eyebrow. Kind of hard not to recognize the face behind half the skyline. He wasn't flattering her, just stating a fact. No awe, no groveling. That in itself was a novelty. Benji was now busy rearranging the sugar packets into a castle formation. He looked up and said, "Do you come here alone a lot?" Sloane blinked. "I suppose I do. Doesn't feel lonely." She stared at him, not because of the question, but because of how gently it was asked, like a whisper meant for someone who forgot how to answer. Before she could say anything, Benji yawned and leaned forward, resting his chin on the table. "I like sitting here," he said sleepily. "It's warm and quiet." Colin leaned over, brushing snow from his son's collar. "You okay, bud?" Benji nodded. "Just tired from the hospital." Sloane's gaze sharpened. Hospital. Colin straightened. There was a pause. A line passed between them, unspoken, invisible, where most people would lie, deflect, or excuse. Colin did neither. "Benji's got leukemia," he said simply. "We just left a chemo session." The words hit her like cold water. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Colin nodded. "We take it one day at a time." Benji, meanwhile, was now holding Hope up like she was watching Sloane. "She thinks you're pretty." Sloane blinked, then let out a short laugh. "Hope has good taste." Colin chuckled. "She also thinks broccoli is evil, so temper that flattery." They sat there a moment longer, the three of them, as the coffee shop buzzed on around them, completely unaware that something remarkable was unfolding in the quiet corner booth. Sloane Kensington, who had spent years perfecting the art of being untouchable, was sitting across from a janitor and his sick child, and feeling more human than she had in years. The spell broke when Colin stood and reached for Benji's hand. "We should let you get back to your morning," he said. "Thank you for letting him sit. He'll talk about this all day." Benji clambered down, picked up Hope, and looked back at Sloane. "Bye, Miss Sloane." He paused. "Can we sit here again tomorrow?" Sloane opened her mouth and stopped. The world outside that coffee shop, the board meetings, the mergers, the people who used her name like currency felt impossibly far away. She looked at the boy, the bear, the janitor with quiet eyes, and she nodded. "I'll be here." Benji smiled like it was Christmas morning. "Come on, Daddy." As they left, Colin turned back briefly. "Thank you," he said again. And then they were gone, leaving behind nothing but a cold cup of espresso, a crumpled napkin, and a heart that for the first time in years had begun to stir. Sloane sat back staring out the frosted window. Snow had started to fall again. Tiny flakes danced along the pavement, soft and slow. She didn't move. Somehow the table didn't feel quite so empty anymore, and for the first time in a very long time she found herself hoping that tomorrow would come. Not for a deal, not for a stock, but for a boy with tired eyes, a bear named Hope, and a janitor who didn't try to impress her. He just showed up, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The next morning, Sloane Kensington arrived at the coffee shop 5 minutes before 10. She didn't know why. She had meetings scheduled, contracts waiting on her signature, and an inbox that could suffocate a lesser executive. But she'd canceled it all. With one text to her assistant, she bought herself the hour, and now she sat at the same window table staring at 2 untouched cups of hot cocoa. The second one, extra marshmallows, no whip, was for him, not Colin, not the janitor, for Benji. Because she wasn't entirely sure which one had stayed in her mind longer, the boy's quiet bravery or the father's calm eyes. The bell above the coffee shop door jingled. Her pulse spiked. It wasn't them. She tapped her thumb once against her cup, then twice more. An old nervous tick. She hadn't done that in years. 10:06. She was about to reach for her coat when the door opened again. Colin stepped in first, holding the door wide open. "Easy now," he murmured. Benji appeared bundled in his blue hoodie, cheeks already pink from the cold. He was dragging Hope behind him in a makeshift scarf sling. When he saw her, he lit up. "Miss Sloane!" he shouted. "You waited," she smiled, and to her surprise it was genuine. "Of course I did." Benji ran over, climbed onto the same seat across from her like it was already his, and reached eagerly for the cocoa. "Did you get this for me?" "I did," she said. "Extra marshmallows." Benji's eyes widened. "You remembered." Colin approached more cautiously, removing his knit cap and rubbing his hands together. "We were just going to walk past, but he insisted. Said you'd be here." Sloane looked up at him. He was right. There was a beat of silence. Then Colin sat down. Sloane cleared her throat. "I hope this isn't awkward." Colin chuckled. "I clean office bathrooms for a living. My bar for awkward is set pretty high." She laughed lightly. "Fair." Benji slurped his cocoa and looked between them like a tiny referee. "Daddy says you're a big boss." Sloane raised an eyebrow. "Did he, now?" Colin shrugged. "In my defense, I said you were a big deal, not a boss." Benji nodded. "Same thing. Daddy's kind of a boss, too. Of brooms." Sloane laughed again, deeper this time. "Is that right?" Colin scratched the back of his neck, embarrassed. "He's in a phase. Everything has to have a title. And what's Hope's title?" she asked, pointing to the bear. Benji tilted his head thoughtfully. "She's head of bravery." There was a long pause. One of those rare golden silences that didn't feel empty, only full of something neither of them knew how to name yet. Sloane turned to Colin, more serious now. I didn't know about Benji's condition yesterday. You weren't supposed to. She studied him. Why not? Colin leaned back slightly. Because pity isn't what we need, and because most people stop listening after the word cancer. Sloane's voice dropped. I didn't. He nodded. No, you didn't. Benji had finished half his drink and was now humming softly, stroking Hope's worn ear. Colin glanced at him, then back at her. We don't expect anything, Miss Kensington. You were kind. That's already more than most. Her brow furrowed. Do people really look away? Colin smiled sadly. All the time. Kids like Benji, they make people uncomfortable. Sick kids aren't part of the brochure for anyone's perfect day. People don't like what they can't fix. Sloane looked down at her hands. For the first time, her voice was quiet. What if I wanted to try? Colin tilted his head. Try what? To do something. Help, I mean. Colin's jaw worked as he searched for words. You don't have to. I know. Then why do you want to? She hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. Because yesterday, your son reminded me what courage looks like, and you reminded me what love sounds like when it isn't loud. He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. That's not something I see in boardrooms, she added softer now. And I think I want to see it more. Benji looked up cocoa mustache above his lip. You could come to the hospital one day. Sloane blinked. Would I be allowed? Colin nodded. Technically, you'd be a guest. Benji leaned forward. You could be Hope's assistant. She gets tired sometimes. Sloane smiled. That sounds like a very important job. Benji grinned. It is. Colin watched the exchange in silence. Then, carefully, he said, You don't strike me as the kind of person who does things halfway. I don't. Then if you're serious, come by tomorrow morning. We'll be at St. Anne's, 9th floor, pediatric oncology. She nodded once. I'll be there. Colin stood and reached for Benji's coat. Then I guess we'll see you soon, Miss Kensington. Sloane looked at the boy, then back at Colin. Call me Sloane. He paused, then offered a quiet smile. All right, Sloane. Benji jumped down and gave her a quick hug before she could brace herself. Thank you for the cocoa and the smile. She knelt to his level, something in her throat tightening. You're welcome, Benji. Then they were gone, just like the day before, a man and his little boy walking back into the cold. But this time, Sloane didn't feel left behind. She felt pulled forward. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just running from something. She was running toward it. And she had no idea that tomorrow at St. Anne's, everything she thought she knew about love, about loss, about life, was about to change. The elevator doors slid open with a gentle chime. Sloane Kensington stepped out onto the 9th floor of St. Anne's Children's Hospital, heels echoing softly against the polished vinyl floor. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, a scent she normally associated with dread, yet somehow it felt strangely grounding now. Bright murals lined the hallway. Smiling suns, dancing clouds, animals painted with exaggerated joy. But nothing in those pictures could mask the quiet grief humming beneath the surface. Parents slumped in waiting chairs, coffee gone cold. Nurses walking with purpose, but eyes weighted by stories they could never fully share. Sloane paused in front of the pediatric oncology wing. She had been inside high-stakes boardrooms, courtrooms, newsrooms. She had faced down billion-dollar negotiations and walked out the winner. But this door felt heavier than all of them. She took a breath and pushed it open. Inside, the room was filled with soft beeping monitors and the hushed voices of nurses. Children in hospital gowns played with building blocks, some with IV poles in tow, others lying still in their beds. And there, sitting cross-legged on a mat by the window, was Benji. He spotted her first. "Miss Sloane," he shouted, then immediately looked guilty. "Sorry, I wasn't supposed to yell." Sloane smiled. "I'll forgive you this once." Benji grinned, then waved her over. "You're late." She blinked. "It's 9:02. He crossed his arms like a tiny CEO. Hope starts her meetings on time. Sloane laughed, not the forced kind, not the one she used to soften hard deals, but the real, breath-catching kind that surprised even herself. She walked toward him, heels clicking softer now, and knelt beside the mat. "What's on today's agenda?" Benji held up a notepad complete with misspelled items in crayon. 1. Draw 2. Eat 3. Hope saves the day 4. Tell Miss Sloane a secret. She smiled. "That's ambitious." "I'm ambitious," he said seriously. "You get that from your dad." Benji nodded. "Daddy says if you can't fix the world, you fix breakfast. And if breakfast doesn't work, try hugs." Sloane blinked, startled by the simplicity, the wisdom. She hadn't heard something that profound in years. Before she could reply, a voice spoke from behind her. "Didn't expect you to show up." She turned. Colin stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, hospital badge clipped to his work belt. He looked like he hadn't slept much, but his gaze was steady. "I told you I would," she said. "People say a lot of things when they're being polite." Sloane rose to her feet. "I'm not most people." He nodded slowly. "That's true." They stood there in silence, the air between them filled with something unspoken. Then Colin gestured toward the coffee machine in the corner. "You want some real fuel? I brought my own," she said, holding up her stainless steel thermos. "Of course you did." Sloane followed him to the corner, watching him pour a cup from the hospital pot. The coffee was weak, probably decades from anything remotely artisanal, but he drank it like it was the finest roast in Manhattan. "I didn't know you worked here," she said. "I don't. Not officially." He took a sip. "They let me mop floors, sometimes organize books in the kids' corner, take vitals when they're short-staffed. They know I won't screw it up." She studied him. "You could be doing something else. With your presence, your mind. You could be anywhere." He didn't look at her. "Yeah, I was. Before. The weight of that single word." She nodded. "What happened?" Colin's fingers tightened slightly around the cup. "My wife died in a fire I couldn't stop, and I haven't worn a badge since." The words hit like a stone in the still water, rippling, lingering. Sloane lowered her voice. "I'm sorry." "You didn't know," he said. "That's the thing about stories. People don't hear them unless someone's willing to tell." He turned to her, then eyes dark but not cold. "And you, what's your before?" Sloane didn't answer right away. Her grip on the thermos tightened. "My brother," she said finally. "Lymphoma. Stage 4. He was 20. I missed his last birthday because I was closing a European acquisition. When I got home, he was gone." Colin looked at her. "You still carry that? Every day?" He nodded slowly. "Then maybe you're exactly where you're supposed to be." Before she could respond, Benji called from the mat. "Daddy Hope says it's time for the secret." Colin smiled faintly. "Better listen. She outranks us both." Sloane walked back to the mat and sat beside Benji. He leaned in, conspiratorially voice just above a whisper. "Want to know my secret?" She nodded solemnly. "Tell me." He leaned in closer. "I'm not scared when you're here." Sloane froze. The words landed in her chest like an arrow of light. She cupped his cheek gently. "Then I promise I'll keep showing up." Colin watched them from a few feet away. In that moment, he saw something he hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not guilt, not obligation, but choice. Sloane Kensington had walked into the hardest room in the hospital. Not to fix it, but to be in it, to witness, to carry, and perhaps, just perhaps, to heal. As she sat there beside Benji drawing superheroes in crayon, Colin realized something quietly devastating. She didn't just care. She belonged. And maybe if he wasn't careful, so did he. The sky that afternoon was the color of steel. Snow drifted lazily from above, painting the city in silence and softness. It was the kind of day that wrapped itself around your shoulders, heavy and still, like a memory you couldn't quite shake. Colin tightened the zipper of Benji's worn jacket, frowning when the top snagged halfway. "You okay, bud?" Benji nodded, his voice muffled beneath his scarf. "I'm warm. Mostly." They were standing beneath the awning outside St. Anne's, waiting for the city bus that was already 10 minutes late. The wind was picking up sharp and biting. Colin rubbed his son's arms, shielding him with his body as best he could. "I knew we should have left earlier," Colin muttered mostly to himself. Benji didn't complain. He rarely did. Instead, he tugged gently at his backpack and reached inside. "What have you got there?" Colin asked. Benji pulled out a small, crinkled paper umbrella. It was bent at the edges, covered in marker-drawn stars. "A project from art therapy. It's for you," Benji said, "so you don't get wet." Colin stared at it throat-tight. "You made this." "For me?" Benji nodded. "You always give me your coat. I wanted to give you something back." Colin crouched down eye level with him. "You do every day." Before Benji could ask what he meant, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down and Sloane Kensington leaned out. "Need a lift?" Colin blinked. "How did you—" "I was heading back from a meeting nearby," she said, gesturing to the empty back seat. "Saw you two freezing your eyebrows off." Colin hesitated. "I don't want to—" "I didn't stop for charity," Sloane interrupted. "I stopped because I didn't want to spend the rest of the day thinking about whether Benji caught pneumonia on the sidewalk." Benji perked up. "We can ride with Miss Sloane." Colin looked at his son, then back at her. He exhaled. "All right." The car's warmth enveloped them the second they climbed in. Benji giggled, running his hands along the heated seat. "It's like sitting on toast." Sloane laughed. "High praise, I think." Colin settled beside his son, awkward in his utility jacket against the leather upholstery. "Thanks. Really." She waved it off. "I owed Hope. She promoted me last week, remember?" Benji beamed. "You're now head of snacks and smiles." "Big shoes," she replied, glancing at Colin. "Think I can handle it?" Colin's voice was quiet. "He doesn't promote just anyone." The ride was smooth, the windows fogged by breath and laughter. Benji sang softly to Hope while Sloane glanced back at them in the rearview mirror, more than once her expression unreadable. At a red light, she asked, "Do you have time for dinner?" Colin blinked. "Now, I thought maybe we'd pick something up. There's a place near my building. It's casual." Colin hesitated. I don't know. We don't usually." Sloane turned voice softer. "You don't owe me anything, Colin. I like being around you two." He studied her face. The vulnerability beneath her usual composure, the careful crack in the armor. Then Benji interrupted, holding up Hope. "She votes yes." Colin smiled faintly. "Guess we're outvoted." The place wasn't fancy. Despite being steps from Sloane's penthouse, the little diner had checkered floors, red vinyl booths, and the smell of grilled cheese lingering in the air. It reminded Colin of somewhere he used to take his wife before life changed. They slid into a booth. Benji sat in the middle, swinging his feet menu upside down. "Can I get pancakes?" Sloane nodded. "If you share them with me." He grinned. "Deal." Colin watched them for a moment, the ease between them the way Sloane's laugh had grown freer. It stirred something in him, something warm and dangerous. He looked down at his calloused hands. You know, I spent a long time learning not to need anyone. Sloane's gaze met his across the table. How's that working out? He let out a short breath. Doesn't hold up well against paper umbrellas? She smiled, but then her voice turned quiet. I used to think needing someone was weakness, that if you wanted help, it meant you weren't strong enough on your own. What changed? She looked at Benji, who was now teaching Hope how to dip a napkin into maple syrup. He did. There was a beat. I never wanted children, Sloane admitted. Too messy, too unpredictable, too much risk. Colin's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. But then this kid walked into my life with frostbitten cheeks and a bear named Hope, she continued, and suddenly I wanted to be the kind of person a child like him could trust. Colin swallowed hard. You are. Their eyes held for a long moment. Not flirty, not dramatic, just open. Benji chose that moment to drop a blueberry in his cocoa. I made it better, he declared. Sloane laughed and tousled his hair. You're a culinary genius. Colin looked down at the paper umbrella Benji had placed beside his plate. Bent, fragile, and still holding. Thank you, he said softly. Sloane raised an eyebrow. For what? For showing up when the world usually walks past. She didn't respond right away. Then, maybe I was walking past myself, and he stopped me. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky cleared just enough to let a few stars peek through. In a city that never paused, 3 people sat in a red booth beneath flickering diner lights sharing pancakes and secrets. And, for the first time in a very long time, none of them felt alone. The next few days unfolded like quiet pages in a book Sloane hadn't realized she'd been writing. Mornings that used to begin with board reports and overpriced espresso were now replaced by a stop at St. Anne's, a smile from Benji, and a wave from Colin that somehow warmed more than coffee ever could. The hospital, once a place Sloane avoided at all costs, had become familiar. Not comfortable, not yet, but meaningful. And yet, nothing prepared her for the invitation. It came in the form of a crayon drawing handed to her by Benji as she was leaving one afternoon. A lopsided house with smoke curling from the chimney. 3 stick figures holding hands. One labeled me, one labeled Daddy, and the third, Miss Sloane. Below it, in big uneven letters, Come to dinner. We have spaghetti. Sloane stared at the drawing, her heart unexpectedly caught in her throat. Colin approached, rubbing the back of his neck sheepish. I told him it was probably too much, he said, but he insisted. He said you look like someone who eats alone too often. Sloane folded the paper carefully. He's not wrong. Colin smiled. You don't have to. Just thought, maybe you'd like to see our world. She looked up at him, something soft flickering in her eyes. Maybe I would. That evening, she stood outside their apartment building, a narrow, weathered brick walk-up tucked between a laundromat and a bodega. Her driver had offered to wait, but she told him no. Some places you walk into on your own. Colin opened the door before she could knock, wearing a soft gray Henley and an expression somewhere between nervous and hopeful. You found us. She held up the crayon invitation. Hard to say no to this. The apartment was small but warm. A scent of garlic and tomato filled the air. There were toys tucked into corners, a laundry basket half full, a drawing taped to the fridge that read, Hope lives here in colorful block letters. Benji stood on a chair by the stove stirring a pot with exaggerated care. Miss Sloane. You came. She smiled, setting down her coat. Head of Snacks and Smiles reporting for duty. He grinned. You're promoted again. To what? He beamed. Family guest. Colin chuckled from the doorway. That's a high honor. Comes with extra garlic bread. Dinner was humble spaghetti with too much Parmesan salad with store-bought dressing and sparkling apple cider in mismatched mugs. Sloane ate every bite like it was the finest meal she'd ever tasted. At one point, Benji leaned across the table serious. "Did you ever eat with someone who made you feel brave?" Sloane paused. "No, but I think I am now." The room went quiet, the kind of silence that said more than noise ever could. Later, as Benji built a tower of stuffed animals in the living room, Sloane wandered to the small windowsill where framed photos sat. A picture of Colin in uniform, fireman's gear helmet tucked under his arm, smile wide and fearless. Another of a woman with kind eyes and a soft laugh frozen mid-motion. "That's Ellie," Colin said from behind her. "My wife." Sloane turned gently, setting the frame down. "She looks light." She was. He joined her by the window. "She used to say grief is just love that doesn't know where to go." Sloane swallowed. And now Colin looked over at Benji, who was making Hope dance across the floor in slow circles. "Now I try to give it a place." She studied him for a long moment. "You're a better man than most." Colin shook his head. "No, just a man who broke and had to choose what pieces to pick up." Sloane lowered her gaze. "I wouldn't know how to start." "Yes, you do," Colin said gently. "You started the moment you let my son sit across from you." She didn't respond, not with words, but her eyes shimmered in a way that said she'd heard him, really heard him. As she prepared to leave, Benji ran to the door, slipping something into her coat pocket. "Don't open it until you get home." She promised she wouldn't. That night, alone in her penthouse, Sloane pulled out the small folded paper. Inside was a drawing her Colin and Benji sitting at a table under a sky of stars. Above them, one word written in all caps: "Stay." She stared at it until the city lights blurred, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in years, she was starting to believe she might not have to do life alone. Not anymore. Not if she chose to stay. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came in pixels and headlines. Sloane was mid-presentation in the boardroom of Kensington Holdings when her assistant leaned in and whispered, "You might want to check this." A discreet iPad was slipped into her hand screen, glowing with a tabloid article so fresh the ink might as well have been wet. "Cold-blooded CEO or compassionate savior. Sloane Kensington's sudden affection for janitor and sick child. Sparks PR debate." There were photos. At the diner, at the hospital. One of Colin carrying Benji wrapped in a coat, Sloane walking just behind them, her face unusually soft. Charity. Or calculated comeback. The boardroom blurred. She excused herself without finishing the presentation. The room full of suited executives didn't question her. They wouldn't dare. But their eyes said everything. She had become the story, and not in the way she ever wanted. Across town, Colin was scrubbing tile floors when Rick, the building supervisor, waved him over. "You made the front page. Janitor." Colin wiped his hands on his jeans and squinted at the tablet Rick shoved at him. He didn't read the whole thing. He didn't have to. The pictures said enough. "Don't know if this makes you lucky or fired," Rick said with a shrug. "Depends on how HR spins it." Colin stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Benji's face. Hope in his hands. Sloane beside them. It felt like someone had stolen a sacred moment and sold it like candy. He left without saying a word. That evening, Sloane stood at her penthouse window, the city lights flickering like static beneath her. Her phone buzzed for the 30th time. Colin. She hadn't answered any of his calls. She was afraid of what she'd hear in his voice, disappointment, anger, or worse, silence. The doorbell rang. Her heart froze. She didn't need to check the monitor. She knew it was him. When she opened the door, Colin's eyes were dark and stormy. His voice was low. "Did you know?" She met his gaze. "No. They followed us," he said. "They watched a sick kid drink cocoa and called it strategy." "I didn't know," she repeated, firmer now. "I don't leak stories about my life. I control them." Colin let out a bitter breath. "Well, someone decided we make a great narrative." Sloane stepped closer. "I'm handling it." Colin didn't move. "That's not the point, Sloane. Then what is—" "The point is—" He paused, his voice cracking. "This was real. At least for us. It still is." He looked at her and something in his eyes dimmed. "Then why does it feel like we just became a headline?" Sloane inhaled deeply. "Because people like me don't get to love quietly. The world doesn't let us." Colin stepped back. "Then maybe it's better if we stay in separate worlds." That sentence cut cleaner than any press scandal ever had. Sloane didn't argue. She didn't chase him. She simply stood in the doorway as he turned and left his shoulders rigid with everything he couldn't say. The door clicked shut, and she was alone again. The next morning, the cafe felt colder than usual. Colin sat at the window table, his hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. Hope rested beside him. Benji was at home napping after a rough night of nausea and tears. The door chimed. Sloane didn't come. He stayed for another hour. She didn't come. 2 days passed. Sloane Kensington was not seen at the hospital, or the cafe, or even in her office, until the world reminded her she couldn't hide forever. It was a Thursday evening when the universe decided to twist the knife. Her phone buzzed again, this time from one of the daycare moms. A link. A photo. Kensington's tender PR trick backfires. Sweet moment or staged charity. The headline punched harder than the first. But what undid her completely was the image. Colin, carrying Benji asleep on his shoulder, and the caption beneath it, "From mop buckets to media darlings, is Kensington collecting pity points." Sloane stared at the screen, her chest burning. This wasn't about strategy anymore. This was cruelty disguised as curiosity. She flung her phone across the couch. It landed face down, buzzing once more. And then silence. She didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she hadn't earned the right to. She had promised to protect them. Instead, she had made them targets. Colin opened the door to their apartment that night and paused. There on the mat was a small white envelope, his name written in Sloane's careful handwriting. Inside, a single line: "I never meant for you to pay the price of my world." No branding, no signature, just the truth. Colin held it for a long time, fingers trembling slightly. Benji tugged at his sleeve. "Was it from Miss Sloane?" Colin nodded. "Is she coming back?" Colin swallowed. "I don't know." Benji looked down at Hope, then whispered, "Hope says yes." Colin smiled faintly, but he didn't say a word, because right now, even Hope felt too fragile to hold. And yet, far across the city, in a penthouse that had never felt so empty, Sloane stood alone at the glass wall. She pressed her palm against the cold and whispered to the dark, "Please, let them forgive me before it's too late." The city didn't answer, but somehow she still hoped they would. The knock came just past dusk. Not the buzzy ring of the intercom, not a delivery ping. A knock, 3 soft raps against old wood like a memory returning gently. Colin opened the door halfway, expecting the neighbor, or maybe a mistake. But it was her. Sloane stood on the other side, not in a suit, not wrapped in designer layers. Just a simple wool coat, no makeup, eyes rimmed with something between exhaustion and vulnerability. "I didn't know if I should come," she said. Colin didn't speak. He simply stepped back. She took that as permission. Inside the apartment was dimly lit, the air tinged with garlic and something warm from the stovetop. Benji wasn't in sight, likely asleep in the back room. Sloane stood in the center of the room, suddenly unsure of what to do with her hands. "I didn't leak the story," she said softly. "You believe me." I believe you," Colin said quietly. "But you still left," she whispered. Colin looked down. "Because I didn't know how to protect Benji from something I couldn't control." Sloane's voice trembled. "Neither did I, but I never meant to hurt him, or you." He looked up finally, meeting her gaze. "You didn't hurt us, Sloane. The world did, and the cameras, and the clickbait, and the narrative they built around three people who just wanted to matter to each other." Sloane stepped closer. "I'm sorry for not fighting harder, for pulling away. You were scared," he said. She nodded, terrified. There was a silence, then thick, honest, and then a small voice broke it. "Miss Sloane." Benji stood in the hallway, hope dangling from his hand. His hair, tousled cheeks flushed from sleep. She knelt immediately, eye level. "Hi, sweetheart. You didn't come back," he whispered. "I know," she said, eyes stinging. "I was trying to fix something, but I think I made it worse." He walked to her slowly, crawled into her arms without another word, and hugged her tight. "I missed you," he murmured into her shoulder. Sloane closed her eyes. "I missed you more." Colin watched them from a distance, arms crossed over his chest. Not guarded, just overwhelmed. Benji pulled back, held up Hope like a gavel. "Hope says we forgive you." Sloane laughed through her tears. "Hope is wise." Colin gestured toward the couch. "Sit, please." They settled there. Sloane sandwiched between them, silence stretching long and strangely comforting. After a while, Colin spoke. "I opened Ethan's room last night." Sloane turned toward him, surprised. "You haven't—" "Since—" He shook his head. "Not once." She waited. "I sat on his bed and read him his favorite book, out loud, like I used to." Colin's voice dropped, and I realized I wasn't doing it for him anymore. Sloane blinked. "Then who?" He looked at her. "You." Sloane's breath caught. Colin continued, voice rough. "Because you reminded me what it means to show up, even broken, even scared. You gave Benji joy, but more than that, you gave me something I forgot existed." Sloane swallowed. "What?" He didn't blink. "A future I want." The room quieted again. Then Sloane reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to Colin. "What's this?" he asked. "My resignation letter." He froze. "From the company. From the machine," she said. "From being someone I never meant to become." Colin opened it, scanned the simple paragraph typed neatly, her signature at the bottom. "You left it all." She nodded. "They can spin stories without me now. I want to write my own." He folded it gently, like something sacred. "You sure?" Sloane turned toward Benji, who was now curled in her lap, fast asleep. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "I've never been more sure." Colin leaned back, looking at the two of them. "I don't have much to offer," he said. "Just a mop, a kid, and a heart that's taken a beating." Sloane smiled, tearful. "Then we match. I have a name they turned into headlines, a past I'd rewrite if I could, and a heart that's learning how to feel again." He reached over slowly, his fingers finding hers. "You're not alone anymore, Sloane." Her fingers tightened around his. "Neither are you." Outside the window, snow had begun to fall again. Not in torrents, not dramatic. Just slow, soft flakes, the kind that coat the city in silence and forgiveness. Inside, three hearts beat a little closer together. Not healed, but healing. And sometimes, That's more than enough. The city was wrapped in gray clouds hanging low like thoughts too heavy to rise. Inside the hospital room, machines beeped in slow, rhythmic patterns. IV bags swayed gently. A single stuffed bear sat on the windowsill staring out into the mist. Benji was asleep, curled up like a comma beneath the blankets. Colin stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed unmoving, and Sloane dressed in jeans and a soft sweater. No armor, no pretense, sat in the armchair, her hands resting on her knees like she was bracing herself for something that hadn't happened yet. "Third fever in 2 weeks," Colin muttered. "The doctor says it's expected, but nothing about this feels normal." Sloane nodded slowly. "It's always worse when they say it's normal, like they're trying to sell you calm." Colin's jaw flexed. "I hate feeling helpless." "You're not," she said quietly. Colin turned, frustration surfacing. "He's sick. He's pale, he hasn't eaten, he cries in his sleep. And all I can do is hold his hand and hope that's enough." Sloane stood slowly. "You know what I see. A father who hasn't missed a single appointment, who knows every line in every bedtime story, who hasn't taken a day for himself in 4 years. He met her gaze, eyes stormy. "And you think that's strength?" "I think that's love," she said, "and love, Colin, is the most exhausting kind of strength there is." He looked away. Sloane crossed the room, picking up Hope from the windowsill and placing the bear gently beside Benji. Then she turned back to Colin. "Do you want me to go?" Colin shook his head. "No." "Then say something, anything." He swallowed the words heavy. "I don't need you to fix this. I don't need a savior. He paused. "I just need someone who won't walk away when it gets dark." Sloane's eyes welled. She stepped closer. "Then I'm exactly where I should be." Colin finally sank into the chair opposite her. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes on his son. "I never thought I'd let someone in again. I thought, if I opened the door, I'd lose something else." "You haven't lost me," Sloane said. "Not unless you push me out." He glanced over. "You were always the one with the power, Sloane." She gave a bitter smile. "You think that because of my name, my office, my car doesn't help," he said dry. "I left all that behind," she whispered. "I chose this room. I chose him. I chose you." The silence between them shifted from tense to tender. Then the curtain moved slightly. Benji stirred, blinking up at them. "Hey, buddy," Colin said gently, standing. "You're awake." Benji smiled weakly. "You two were whispering like cartoons." Sloane laughed softly and moved to his side. "We were talking about you. About how I'm going to grow wings when I'm better," he asked. Colin raised an eyebrow. "Wings?" Benji nodded solemnly. "To fly around and drop pancakes on sad people." Sloane grinned. "That's a brilliant plan." Benji's smile faded slightly. "You're not going to leave again, are you?" Sloane's hand found his. "Not unless you tell me to," he squeezed her fingers. "Then stay forever." Colin stepped in, brushing Benji's hair back. "Forever's a big promise, bud." Benji yawned. "Yeah? But Hope says she believes her." Sloane's voice dropped to a whisper. "Hope is a good judge of character." Benji nestled deeper into his blanket. "If you stay, can we be a real family?" Sloane looked at Colin. He looked at her, and without speaking, they both knew what the answer was. Colin nodded. "Yeah, buddy, we can." Benji closed his eyes again, safe between the two people who refused to leave. Later, when the room dimmed into the soft blue of night, Colin pulled a chair close beside Sloane's and whispered, "I've lived my whole life with fire at my back, and somehow you make me feel like I can finally sit still." Sloane rested her head on his shoulder. "And you make me believe that love doesn't need a press release. It just needs to be real." Colin kissed the top of her head, and the machines kept beeping and the wind kept blowing. But in that room, that small, sterile room filled with love and quiet strength, something sacred took root. Not because anyone had all the answers, but because for once, no one was running away. The morning sun rose slow and pale, leaking through the apartment blinds in fragile streaks. The scent of oatmeal and cinnamon lingered in the air, but no one was eating. Benji was quiet at the kitchen table, spinning a spoon slowly in his bowl. Colin watched him from across the room, noticing every little thing. The way his shoulders slumped, the dark shadows under his eyes, how he hadn't hummed to hope in 2 days. Sloane poured a second cup of coffee, placed it in front of Colin, and sat down. He didn't sleep well last night. Colin nodded. He kept asking questions he already knew the answers to, like what Colin looked at her tired, like whether I'd still love him if he didn't get better. Sloane's face folded in pain. What did you say I told him, that loving him wasn't something he had to earn, that it just is? He paused, like breathing. She reached over her hand, resting on his. You said exactly what he needed. Colin looked over at his son. I don't think it landed. There was silence for a beat, then Sloane stood. I have an idea. 2 hours later, they were bundled up, heading out the door, destination unknown to Benji, who protested only mildly until Sloane told him there would be pancakes involved. They took the subway, something Sloane hadn't done in years. Colin joked that she looked like a tourist holding the pole too tightly and giving wide-eyed glances every time the train jolted. She laughed genuinely, the kind of laugh that caught Colin off guard and made something inside him ache, the good kind. Then, after 3 blocks of walking and 1 wrong turn, they arrived. Benji stared up at the small storefront with a crooked sign and blinking neon light, Maple and Mornings Cafe. He blinked. This is where we met. Sloane smiled. Yes, the table was over there, Benji said, pointing through the window. And I said, Can I sit here? Colin grinned. And your life hasn't been the same since. They stepped inside. The bell jingled and the warmth of the cafe wrapped around them like an old friend. The same barista was behind the counter. She gave Sloane a double take, then smiled knowingly. Your table's open, she said. They slid into the booth. Sloane took the same seat. Benji climbed up across from her, eyes wide with recognition. Everything looks smaller now, he said. Colin chuckled. You got taller. Benji glanced around. Hope's not here. Sloane leaned forward. No, but that's why we're here. Benji frowned. What do you mean? Colin reached into his coat and pulled out a small folded paper, one of Benji's old drawings, now worn soft at the creases. You left this here the last time, Colin said. Right after you drew it. You must have dropped it. Benji unfolded it slowly. It was a picture of the 3 of them, crude, bright colors, big smiles. He'd scribbled one word in giant lopsided letters across the top, stay. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up. I remember. I made it after the first time Miss Sloane hugged me. Sloane reached across the table, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. You made me want to stay. Benji's eyes brimmed suddenly. Then, why did everything change after that? Colin sat forward. Because people out there tried to turn something beautiful into something ugly, and for a little while, we let them. Benji sniffed. But we came back. Yes, Sloane said gently. We came back. Benji pulled Hope from his coat pocket and placed her in the center of the table. She's been really quiet lately, he said softly. I think she got scared too. Colin reached over and gave Hope's little fabric paw a squeeze. She's allowed to be scared, but I don't want her to stay scared forever, Benji whispered. Sloane took a deep breath. Then maybe it's time to do what brave people do. Benji tilted his head. What's that? She smiled. They choose to love anyway. There was a long pause, and then Benji said, Even when it hurts. Colin answered, voice low. Especially then. They ate pancakes slowly, no rush, no speeches. Just warmth and syrup and 3 people who had nearly broken, but didn't. After they finished, Benji took the drawing and added one more word beneath stay. Home. Later that afternoon, back at the apartment, Colin went to grab groceries while Sloane helped Benji organize his bookshelf. But 10 minutes after he left the apartment door creaked open again. Sloane Benji called. "I think Daddy forgot something." No answer. She looked up. Benji was at the door, alone, and crying. "Hope's gone," he whispered. "I left her on the bench outside the cafe." Sloane knelt instantly. "Sweetheart, I'm sure we can get her back." "No," he said, trembling. "She's gone. I forgot her. I was supposed to protect her, and I forgot." Sloane pulled him into her arms. "It's okay. We'll go back right now. We'll find her." "No," Benji sobbed. "If I forget her, maybe I'll forget everything. Maybe I'll forget the day we met. Maybe I'll forget what it felt like to have you there." Sloane's voice broke. "You won't forget Benji. How do you know?" She looked him in the eye. "Because I'll remember for both of us." He stared at her, searching, needing. "And so will Daddy," she added. Benji exhaled, tears still streaking his cheeks, but his grip on her sleeve softened. "Okay," he whispered. That night, Colin returned to find Sloane and Benji asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over them, a new paper bear cradled in Benji's arms. And beside it, taped carefully to the armrest, a note written in uneven handwriting. "Even if I lose the bear, I won't lose us." Colin smiled, and something in his heart finally exhaled. The winter sun was slipping behind the skyline when the call came. It wasn't dramatic, just a simple ring, too soft, almost forgettable. Sloane picked it up on the second try. "Hello, it's Dr. Salinger from St. Anne's," came the familiar measured voice. "We've reviewed Benji's latest panel." She gripped the phone tighter. "Yes, he paused. Then, there's encouraging movement. His immune system is responding. We still have a long road ahead, but it's the first time in months we've seen his counts rise on their own." Sloane closed her eyes. For a moment she forgot how to breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. The doctor's tone softened. "He's a fighter, and he has something very few kids in that wing have. What's that, a village?" That weekend, Colin drove them to a farm an hour outside the city, the kind with creaky fences and animals that didn't care about status or suits. It had been Benji's request after a week of good days. "I want to touch something that's not a needle," he'd said, making Sloane laugh through her tears. They arrived just before noon. The air smelled like hay and wet earth. A muddy donkey greeted them near the entrance, braying as if annoyed by their tardiness. Benji lit up instantly. "This is better than the hospital." Colin grinned. "That's a low bar, buddy." Benji trotted toward the animals with a small bucket of feed. Sloane watched him with cautious joy. "He looks like he belongs here," she murmured. Colin stood beside her, watching his son dance between goats and ducks. "He belongs anywhere that lets him breathe." They followed slowly, hands brushing once, then staying connected. Sloane looked up at him. "How do you do it?" Colin raised an eyebrow. "Do what? Wake up each day with the weight of everything you've lost, and still love this hard." He thought for a moment. "Because when you've lost everything, the next thing you love with your whole life." Sloane's breath caught. They stopped near a low fence, Benji now trying to braid the mane of a very patient pony. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked. Colin's smile was faint. "I used to be terrified of that question. And now," he turned to her, his eyes clear. "Now, I hope the answer is you." She blinked, caught off guard. "Me, you," he repeated. Not because you showed up when things got easy, but because you showed up when you didn't have to. Sloane's voice dropped. I didn't know I was allowed to want this. Colin tilted his head. Why wouldn't you be? Because I've spent my whole life being useful, successful, necessary, but never wanted. Not for me. He stepped closer. You're wanted, Sloane. Not for what you give, but for who you are when you think no one's looking. Her lips parted, something trembling in her eyes, and then Miss Sloane Benji's voice rang out. This goat loves you. They both turned to find Benji giggling, a goat nibbling the edge of his coat while he held out a fistful of feed. Colin laughed. Well, I guess it's official. Sloane raised an eyebrow. Official? You've got fans in every species. On the drive back, Benji fell asleep in the back seat, his head tilted toward the window, Hope clutched loosely in his lap. Sloane reached over and turned down the radio, watching Colin drive, one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting near hers. I've never felt this kind of peace, she said softly. Colin glanced at her. Because for the first time you don't have to perform. She nodded. It's terrifying and beautiful. Good things usually are. They rode in silence for a while, the city reappearing in the distance, golden in the last light of day. Then Sloane turned to him, her voice suddenly shy. Do you think I fit in this, with you, with him? Colin didn't hesitate. You don't fit, he said. You belong. The next day, Colin invited her to lunch, just the two of them at the same small cafe where their story began. Sloane laughed. Are you asking me on a real date? Colin smirked. I'm asking you to sit with me. No kid, no headlines. Just sit. I think I remember how to do that, she teased. They met at noon, same table by the window. The barista didn't even blink this time. She simply brought cocoa with extra marshmallows before they ordered. Sloane leaned back in her chair. Feels like we've come full circle. Colin stirred his coffee. Not a circle. A beginning. She tilted her head. You always talk like someone who used to write poetry. Colin laughed. Firemen don't write poems, but janitors might, he chuckled. Only for the right girl. They shared the meal slowly. Conversation dipped from light to tender and back again. At one point, Sloane looked out the window and whispered, I didn't know it was possible to build something out of ashes. Colin reached across the table, his hand warm in hers. It is, but only if you stop pretending the fire didn't happen. She looked at him, eyes glossy. Then let's stop pretending. And in that cafe over cocoa and quiet promises, two people who had once given up on joy chose to let it in. Not loudly, not perfectly, but fully. And sometimes that's the loudest kind of love there is. Spring arrived like a whispered promise, not sudden, but certain. The snow had melted. The trees, bare just weeks ago, now stretched toward the sky with cautious green buds. And in Central Park, where life always seemed to restart, first a little boy in a blue hoodie ran ahead chasing pigeons with a bear tucked under one arm. Benji was laughing. Not the tired chuckle of recovery, but the belly-deep, eyes-squinting kind of laugh that only children truly know. The kind that makes strangers smile just walking by. Behind him, Sloane and Colin walked side by side, no longer hesitant, no longer circling something unsaid. They were a picture now, a quiet, beautiful picture of two people who had chosen to stay. He's so different now, Sloane said, watching Benji climb up on a bench. Colin nodded. He's lighter, like he's not carrying the weight of what if anymore. She glanced up at him. And you? Colin looked out over the park. I used to think joy was a betrayal. A betrayal to the people I lost, he said. Like if I smiled too wide or laughed too loud, I'd be forgetting them. Sloane reached for his hand, and now he squeezed her fingers. Now I think joy is how I remember them best. They stopped by the swing set, the very one where Benji had once asked if she would ever come back. Today he didn't ask. He simply ran straight into her arms, thrusting a fistful of wildflowers at her. "These are for you," he said breathlessly. "I picked them. No one else, just me." Sloane knelt. "They're perfect." Benji brushed invisible dust from his jacket and took a deep breath, suddenly very serious. "Can I ask something?" "Of course," she said. Benji's voice dropped to a whisper. "Can I call you Mom?" Sloane froze. Then he added even softer, "Just once, and then forever." Colin turned slowly toward her. She hadn't expected it. Not like this, not today. But something broke open in her chest, a warmth, a tenderness so profound it stole her breath. She swallowed. Yes. Benji smiled, then said it not with hesitation but with certainty. "Mom." It was clumsy and sacred and perfect. Sloane pulled him into her arms, holding him so tightly she thought her heart might burst. Colin looked away for a second, blinking fast. Later that evening, back in their shared home, not hers, not his, but theirs. Colin lit a candle at the dinner table, something he never used to do. Benji wore his new pajamas, a cape tied around his neck, eating spaghetti as if it were a championship meal. Sloane served garlic bread and hummed under her breath a soft, almost unrecognizable melody. Joy, perhaps. After dinner, while Benji colored on the living room floor, Colin reached into a drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Sloane's heart skipped. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply opened it and placed the ring gently on the table between them. "I don't need a moment," he said. "I just need forever." She looked down at the ring, a simple gold band with a tiny engraving on the inside. It read, "Sit with me. Stay." Sloane looked at him through tears. "You remembered. I never forgot." She picked up the ring, slid it on her finger, and whispered, "Then let's stay. All the way." Colin smiled. Always. Weeks passed. The Hope and Benji Foundation opened its doors quietly, but with purpose. They didn't launch with confetti or cameras. Instead, the ribbon was cut by Benji and two other kids in matching superhero capes. Sloane stood beside Colin, her hand in his, watching parents sip warm cocoa in the therapy room, while children painted their fears onto canvas and turned them into courage. "This," she whispered, "is the best thing I've ever built." Colin kissed the top of her head, "Because it came from everything you never thought you'd survive." And he was right. 1 year later, the cafe with the crooked sign was still standing. Benji, now stronger, louder still, carting hope everywhere, ran ahead and pushed open the door like he owned the place. "The booth's free," he shouted. Sloane and Colin followed, sliding into the same seats from that very first day. Benji climbed into the middle. "Can I sit here?" he teased with a grin. Sloane laughed. "Only forever." The barista brought 3 hot chocolates, extra marshmallows. Benji took a sip and looked up at them. "Do you think this is what miracles feel like?" he asked. Colin looked at Sloane. Sloane looked at him, and then she answered, voice full and quiet. "No. I think this is what love feels like when it remembers to stay." And somewhere in the corner of that little cafe, behind a pane of slightly fogged glass and a table full of laughter, sat a small, stitched bear named Hope. Watching, listening, home, forever. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet question. Can I sit here to change the course of a life? This story wasn't just about a janitor or a billionaire. It was about showing up for each other when it matters most. About love that isn't loud, but steady, healing, real, and about the reminder that hope doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just holds your hand and stays. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Which moment in the story touched your heart the most? If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you believe a little more, in second chances, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter of hope. Thank you for spending this time with us. Your presence, your thoughts, and your kindness keep this community alive. Until next time, keep your heart open, because someone somewhere just might need a place to sit.